Hello and welcome to episode 2 of David's Divergent Discussions. I'm your host, David Gray-Hammond, and today we are here for what really is the first proper episode of David's Divergent Discussions. Obviously, episode 1 was the interview Natasha did with me about my book, but this is the first episode where we're going to have one of David's divergent discussions, really. So today I'm here with Katie Munday from Autistic and Living the Dream, and I'm going to let her tell you what we're here to talk about today. Let's let them, sorry, I should say. Got to get the pronouns right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Katie Munday. As David's just said, some of you may know me as Autistic and Living the Dream. It's something that today we're going to be talking about, something that David and I have been chatting about fairly regularly anyways. And it's about how the pathologization, so the stigma and the prejudice and the horrible ideas around mental health, and I don't know, like mental health conditions is quite the word I'm looking for, but mental health conditions, definitely mental health crisis, stops people like me and David from finding community within kind of, I mean, the word neuroqueer is used quite a lot. Neurokin is used quite a lot, and I don't know if there is a mental health neuroqueer equivalent, like as the pathologization of mental health caused us to be more isolated.
Yeah, so first things first, housekeeping. Katie's feeling poorly, so if they cough a bit, Katie has already apologized. Um, but one of the things that we're doing with this podcast is just going for it. And, if people need to cough, if people need to go off on tangents, we're neurodivergent. It's what we do. Like, but anyway, yeah. So when this was suggested by you, I thought it's a really good topic because the autistic community, or what's more broadly referred to as the neurodivergent community, has that really strong positive sense of identity often amongst its members. And but the problem is that the neurodivergent community largely seems to be autistic people and ADHD people, and there's not as much discussion of things that would fall under the umbrella of mental health in general. I find we talk about the fact that we experience mental health concerns,
Mm.
but society's done this wonderful job of turning it into a pathology, an illness, and centered us as not just a problem for society, but also centered a problem within us that it is our responsibility to fix.
Mm.
And I think this really is quite harmful, not just for autistic and ADHD people or people who are more broadly seen as neurodivergent. It's a problem for every single person because when the neurodiversity paradigm really rests on this idea that all brains are different, and neurodivergence isn't necessarily something you are born with. You can acquire neurodivergence later on in life through physical trauma, through psychological trauma. In fact, Nick Walker discusses in her book, Neuroqueer Heresies, the fact that there's certain meditation practices that can alter the way your mind works, and effectively you can neuroqueer yourself through meditative practice. So it makes me wonder, what purpose has it served in society pathologizing mental health when actually it would be much kinder to let people see themselves as neurodivergent rather than ill?
Mm. Mm. It's yeah, it's I think Nick also talks about substance use and psychedelics,
Yes.
changing neurodivergence as well. I wanted to shove that in there as well because I find that really interesting. um I think from like my own personal experience, when I got diagnosed autistic, um and there's a lot of privilege that goes with what I'm about to say, I found finding myself on online autistic spaces, because my diagnosis came just before the first UK lockdown for COVID. So it was all online. All of it was online. And I found it quite easy to connect with people, people of a similar mind, people of, like a similar culture. I don't think all autistic people share one culture, because that doesn't make sense for different intersections. But the culture that I share between, so like you and me and the other folks from Academy and Aim for the Rainbow and various other people I talk to online, there's a shared language and a shared understanding that I don't get in non-autistic spaces. So that was really affirming and makes things so much easier. Like, even when you were just saying, like, Katie's not very well today and they might cough, if you said that in a non-autistic space, people would be like, why is he telling us that they might cough? That's like a really strange thing to tell other people. But I know if I was listening to someone cough, that would be really reactive. I'd have like a reaction to that, which I wouldn't enjoy. And I have a feeling a few of us would be like that. So even stuff like that, as we can appreciate each other's needs a lot more. So I found making kind of connections and friends and community relatively easy. That doesn't mean it's always like, rainbows and unicorn farts and glitter and stuff. That sometimes it goes a bit wrong as well. But I found I also got diagnosed with OCD at the same time. I had no idea that you could get diagnosed with OCD whilst you were having your kind of autism assessment. So it was a surprise to get the diagnosis, but it completely and utterly makes sense for my experience of the last 20 odd years, maybe longer. So my autistic formal validation, if you will, made it easier for me to find similar others. But my OCD realization has made me feel more isolated. Because we're the OCD people at.
Yeah.
And do we have shared cultures and shared understanding and language and word use and stuff like that? I don't know if I've just been massively unlucky and just not been able to find groups and other people who are also OCD. But in general, like you were saying, I think it's about the only absolute I think I will probably ever stand by is that, with a fair amount of certainty, I would say that most, if not all, autistic people are traumatized in some way or other. So we all have, not necessarily co-occurring, but co-occurring mental health concerns as well. And a lot of that is based around social anxiety and general anxiety, depression, other kind of mood disorders like that. I'm trying to say this without making a hierarchy, because I really don't want to do that. But things that are perhaps less common, like OCD, psychosis, borderline personalities, stuff like that, I don't see spoken about a lot in autistic spaces, or see a lot of people identify with that. And I don't know if that's based around shame, or I don't know what it is.
I think on the one hand, you have this thing where in the autistic community, we have those shared experiences and that shared communication style that often constitutes what we might call autistic culture.
Mm,
Um, and we have had the opportunity to celebrate our strengths as well as our struggles. But for people like you and I, your OCD, I've got a schizophrenia spectrum condition. Um, we've been conditioned all our lives to believe, well, I suffer from this. It causes suffering, therefore there is
mm,
nothing good to celebrate. Well, actually, the thing is that diagnoses, that we're given them as if they are neat little boxes,
mm,
but it all blurs together to create its own unique experience. So in my opinion, you can't celebrate your strengths being autistic if you've got a mental health concern without also trying to celebrate the intersection where that meets what one might refer to as mental illness. I don't like the term illness, but that's what people often call it. And for me, like, I'm not like three different personalities where I'm autistic, ADHD, schizophrenic. I'm more like audiphrenic, you know. It's like ADHD phrenic. Like, you know, it's its whole thing together. And I think part of the problem is, and yes, I'm gonna have a bit of a rant about capitalism here. We have been taught that if we have a mental health concern, especially one that causes not just distress for ourselves, but inconvenience for other people, we have to take medicine for it. And that medicine is actually very expensive. And there's been a very successful campaign by pharmaceutical companies to patent their new medications and convince medical staff that it's going to solve the problems. So I think there is an element of that capitalist system of producing a medication that makes people less inconvenient and better at producing profit. There's that attitude there that, well, this is something you have to do. You have to see yourself as ill so that you'll take the medicine that we have made and that we are using to make money. Like, now, I'm not saying don't take medicine. Not like I take medication; it's very helpful to me. But we do have to recognise. I was reading in Sedated by James Davies. For about 50 years now, outcomes in psychiatry have not improved, despite all the drug research that's gone on. What this says to me is there is a missing piece. Yeah, okay, for me, as a schizophrenic person, medication has made my life easier, but it hasn't taken away all the problematic parts of the experience. What actually helps me more than the medicine is having a community around me that is supportive and teaches me to love myself for the good and bad. Because this is the thing, I think this is why people get uncomfortable when we talk about neurodiversity and neurodivergence outside of the context of innate neurodivergence, such as being autistic, because we've created this world where it's like we cannot recognize, a lot of people cannot recognize the negatives of being autistic, and there are some negatives to it in the world we live in. You know, whilst I don't think the social model of disability tells the whole story, I prefer the predicament model more. I'm still reading about it, so I won't get too deep into the predicament model. The social model of disability is used as this broad brush where it's like, okay, disability is a form of oppression inflicted upon us, but then there's aspects of being autistic, which is like, you know, I can't turn the sun down. So if I have an aversion to bright lights, I'm going to suffer as a result of being autistic, because if we turn the sun down, life on Earth stops. No one looks for the positives with mental health. So we look at all the positives for being autistic and tend to avoid talking too much about the negatives because we don't want people to use that to drown out the positives. And we do the opposite with mental health, even though in a sense, well, not even in a sense, it is neurodivergence.
Yeah,
it's just
absolutely.
neurodivergence that we acquire as we go through life. And I think the reason people get uncomfortable with the two being conflated is because of this very successful campaign to effectively demonize our mental well-being, and people don't want that. They don't want to be tarred with the same brush, basically. So when you say, actually, you're not ill, you're neurodivergent, people go, well, no, because it makes me suffer. You can suffer because of neurodivergence.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can need medication because of neurodivergence. I mean, take ADHD as an example. No one will deny it's neurodivergence, but lots of ADHDers use medication to get through life You know,
Yeah,
I don't get prescribed ADHD meds because of my psychosis, but you know what? I've currently got a can of energy drink right here in my
yeah,
hand.
for real. Yeah.
Like, you know, we all struggle with things, and this is where the problem is when we don't have a cohesive community for those of us who experience the so-called mental illness, we we're that community connectedness, in my opinion, is that missing piece.
Mm,
If you had the medication and the community connectedness, I reckon you would suddenly see some significant improvements in psychiatric outcomes. You know, the ones that supposedly haven't improved for half a century.
mm, mm. And I can attest to that because um so I had postnatal depression, postnatal mood disorder or something. So I got after I had my little man, so that was God, nearly 2 years ago now. And I was um the midwives were brilliant with me. All of the I'm forgetting all my words, but all of the team had come out to see you after you've had your baby. Brilliant. And they suggested to me that I join a local. It's got a really strange name. Um, Knowing Me, Knowing You is what the group is called, which always makes me think of ABBA. So I'm like,
Knowing
ah.
me, knowing you.
But I think most of us in the group affectionately called the group Depression Group.
Okay.
So yeah, as you do. But being able to, I think they were probably only ran for about 8 weeks. But being able to go into a room, and you might appreciate this as well as a new parent, David, but being able to go into a room and go, oh my goodness, I have this baby and I love them so much, but I don't know what I'm doing. And a bit different for me, but like my body is completely changed and my hormones are all over the place. And I've done this, right in the middle of bloody well, not the height of COVID because COVID is still absolutely rampant. Um, but at a really high point in kind of COVID transmission, um, in the midst of kind of the last lockdown, I had little man. So, I didn't know who I was anymore. And also just before that, just got my OCD diagnosis and my autistic diagnosis. So I'm still trying to unpick that whilst finishing my degree. So like by the time I'd had my son, I was like, I need human interaction. I need to get out of my house and various other things. So like that was so important to me, and I still talk to two or three of the other mums who were there, um, and go out with them every so often. So that was a really saving that saved my ass after I had my son. Like I'm not going to lie. And I was on kind of medication for mental health anyways, but then that that can become a little bit tricky if you're trying to breast or chest feed. So that was all a thing as well. Um, so yeah, so these things do exist. Um, but so I can attest to the fact that they do help. Um, so I think there is definitely something that is needed there. Yeah, for people with mental health concerns, just to socialize with each other and just be in a room with people who actually get it. Because I've been with Jay now, my husband, for 9 years, and I have not explained. He's heard me talk about being autistic until the cows come home, right? And about being ADHD, and he's probably bloody sick of it. Um, but I don't talk about my intrusive thoughts with OCD. I don't. He's aware of some of my compulsive behaviors because obviously he can see them. Um, but I've not really delved too much into that with him. Um, and so why is that? This is like the person I trust most in my life. Why, um, with some of the thoughts I have to keep telling myself that's not a reflection on who I am or how I feel about the world or about other people, because some of my thoughts can be really rough, really kind of violent based, really just awful. Around, I mean, like trigger warning around like self-harm and violence towards other people, or death is something that my intrusive thoughts talk about a lot. I don't know for what reason, but the HIV and AIDS infection is a big thing that I obsess over. I have no reason to. I'm in a monogamous, what most people would consider a heterosexual relationship. So why is this something that I have been obsessing about for 15, 20 years now? And I think if you say that, like, I know that I can say that to you, David, because you're not going to be the kind of person who judges anyways, but you, although you and I don't have the same mental health concerns, I can understand that you know exactly what it feels like to have loads of thoughts in your head that do not represent you, and then you do behaviors based on that character that isn't you, if you make sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and interestingly for me, as a schizophrenic person, like the the traits of OCD kind of bleed over into the some of the traits I have with my schizophrenia, because my I could be just going about my day and my brain will just be like, you're trapped in a computer simulation. You need to run. Like, and I'm like, on the medication, I'm able to go like, that was a really weird thought to have. But you know, it's I thought, because I sometimes, and trigger warning again, I also experience violent or aggressive thoughts or thoughts of self-harm as intrusive thoughts.
Mm,
And it wasn't until a very nice therapist sat me down and said, David, actually, a lot of people have these thoughts, like a lot of people have these thoughts, but with your
mm,
particular mental health conditions,
yeah.
you respond to them differently because they upset you in a very deep way, because you start to internalize them and believe
Mm,
that's who you are as a
mm-hmm,
person. Now, if I'd have had that community connectedness, other people in the community might have taught me that years ago. And
yeah.
I wouldn't have spent like over a decade thinking, oh my God, I have these horrible thoughts. I must be an awful person. But actually, no, like this therapist explained to me that we know from research that even people without these sorts of mental health concerns have these sorts of thoughts. Where the mental health stuff comes in is in how our brain responds to those thoughts.
Mm, yeah.
And that's often trauma based. And the reason our brain is responding differently is because we are neurodivergent.
Mm, mm, yeah. So it's, and I think the concern about it as well, saying it out loud and telling other people, is that, we're both parents, you and I. We both work with vulnerable young people and adults. Um, and I personally, anyways, I don't want to talk for you, but I personally feel very worried as a multiply neurodivergent and disabled parent about trusting governing bodies and social care and various other things about keeping my family together. Now, I don't have any reason to believe that can't be the case for my family going forward. But once you start layering things, misogyny, transphobia, um, all these various other things that I might have coming my way from various different places, it does become really worrying. So if I said to someone, "Oh, I get a recurring thought of harming myself or whatever," and people get worried about that, and I can appreciate that people get worried about that, um, but I'm never going to act on it. But people won't believe you when you say that you won't act on it, which is really gaslighty in itself, anyways. So every time I've kind of stuck my head over the OCD parapet, I've always thought, you know, I think with being autistic, you get a lot of microaggressions anyways. And, oh, I didn't realize you're autistic. And, oh, you don't look autistic. Oh, but you speak really well, and all this various other crap that people say. And then I think bringing OCD or whatever mental health concern that you have to the table as well, people just look at you as if like, what? Oh no, I don't. Like if they don't want they want the shiny, neurodivergent, quirky, um, funny, even though it's not intentional, autistic and ADHD person, because that's me as well. But they're not ready for the, oh, that's a bit weird. That's a bit concerning. Well, yeah, hello. Hi.
This brings us to a really valid point now, I think, which is people talk about, well, I talk about neuronormativity a lot. And it's not just about in how we express ourselves and our behavior that neuronormativity takes a stance. Neuronormative attitudes try to tell us what thoughts it is okay
Mm,
and isn't okay to have.
mm, mm,
You know, so when we have these intrusive thoughts that are completely involuntary, we then have to justify that we don't want to act on them and that they upset us. But we only have to justify that because society has taught us that having involuntary thoughts that you have no desire to act on is bad, and you are bad for having them. Like, because that's what neuronormativity does. It doesn't just control our behavior, it tries to control every aspect of how our
mm.
brain expresses our existence. So we live in this society where we go, yeah, I have intrusive thoughts, but I don't want to act on them. And we're essentially reconditioning ourselves into that neuronormativity of, well, there is something wrong with my thoughts because I have to justify that I don't want these thoughts. Like, I think anyone who knows people, like, if you
Mm,
know a person, you'll probably have a pretty good idea of whether they're an axe murderer or not, as a general rule. You might get a creepy vibe if they're somewhat of a serial killer, you know. But for some reason, we still have to justify that our thoughts were not okay and we don't want to act on them. And I find that fundamentally wrong, that normative society is now telling us what thoughts we can and can't have. Now,
mm,
you know, that's not to say that there are harmful thoughts to have. There are things that if you are thinking them, there's probably some work to be done there.
mm, mm,
But in general, with intrusive thoughts, the fact that we constantly have to justify ourselves as I've had a bad thought, but it's naughty and I'm not going to do anything with it, it's just another way that our expression of self is controlled. And this leads into that idea of neuroqueer theory, because if you're neuroqueering yourself, it's a very privileged position to be in because you have to be in a environment where it is safe for you to authentically express yourself.
mm,
Because I'm not being funny, if you exist at the intersection of, say, being a black person and having a mental health condition and being autistic, if you start to try and authentically embody yourself, your life could be in danger.
absolutely.
You know, especially if you live in the US or something. You know, there are lots of situations where it is not safe to authentically express the contents of your brain.
Mm,
So I love neuroqueer theory, and I identify broadly as neuroqueer myself
mm,
because just about everything about me is, well, about the most typical thing about me is that I'm a dude with a beard. Like everything else is, you know, a wild card once you get to know me. You know, as we've joked, you know, I'll probably have written 5 more books by December, by the end of December. You know, I'm not a person who does things in a normal way.
no.
Um, you know, but it is a privilege to be able to identify as neuroqueer, to be able to neuroqueer in the verb sense, because it's just not safe for everyone.
Mm. And I've got to say, it's probably safer for me than it is for you, David, because you're like a 6 foot big burly fella. I'm like 5'4", people would assume I'm a woman, and therefore if I have an emotional outburst, let's say, out and about, people are more likely to come to me and try to help me um, than they would, seeing a big 6'4" fella having an emotional time out and about, are more likely to kind of run away, get a bit worried, get a bit scared.
Yeah,
And then that's obviously when people make phone calls and stuff, which we know that people are more likely to make phone calls about Black, Indigenous people of colour, especially Black men and Black trans women, which is absolutely horrifying. Um, so yeah, but I smiled because I knew neuroqueer was going to come up at some point.
yeah. I mean,
uh,
it's got to. You can't really talk about this without talking about
mm,
neuroqueer theory, I don't think. But
mm,
it's an interesting point that you make, because I often forget that I'm a 6'4" man over 20 stone. Like,
yeah,
excuse my
formidable.
French, I'm built like a brick shithouse. Like, I'm a human mountain. And I can still think of one particular meltdown I had where my psychosis was wild. I was in and out of the psych ward, and I've never hurt a person in that state. But what did happen was I put my fist through a solid wood door. Now, someone my size doing something like that in public because they are expressing fear as a result of the way their brain works and being
Mm,
overwhelmed by that. If you do that in public, at the very least, you're going to get done for criminal damage.
mm,
At the most, if someone tries to intervene, you may very well end up with an assault charge, you
yes.
know? And this is another really important point of this whole, like, lack of positive identity around mental health and the lack of community, is
Mm,
that actually you are considerably more likely to find yourself criminalized
mm,
if you experience a mental health concern. If your mental well-being is not good, if you are struggling, if you're not able to hide that from everyone, there is a reasonable chance you're going to end up on the wrong side of the law.
mm, mm. It's not mental health based, but I remember quite a few years ago being on the bus, and there was a fellow who came on the bus, and for me, he quite clearly had cerebral palsy. I work with a lot of people and play basketball with a lot of people who have cerebral palsy. Um, and he came onto the bus, and because of his CP, um, he was moving around quite a bit, kind of like wobbling from one leg to the other, and his speech was slurred. And this was probably about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. Um, but the bus driver was going to not let him on because he thought he was drunk, um, which he showed no signs of as far as I was concerned. Um, Anyways, he eventually got onto the bus, but it's stuff like that. Like, if you don't even have like a very, I mean, you don't have to know much about cerebral palsy for you to be able to perhaps, like, I'm not going around diagnosing everyone, but a little bit of information about physical disability would actually be quite helpful for people who are bus drivers, taxi drivers, front of house of places, like, so you can just have people come onto the bus without being told that they're a pisshead at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a bit much. Do you know what I mean?
I've had people assume that I've relapsed and stuff because, as part of being schizophrenic, I can experience catatonic states where, my body will literally
Mm,
just freeze in the position I'm in, and I'll be stuck like that for God knows how long. And people look at you when you're going through things like that. Oh, well, it's obviously drugs, And there's a broader conversation to be had there about the demonization of substance use. But
yeah.
one of the problems I have is that, coming back to that community connectedness idea, which I really do feel is a significant piece of what is missing from good positive identity for us in this sense. People go, well, there's peer support groups, but you have to look at those peer support groups because they're largely run by the same people who are telling us that we are ill and broken. A lot of them
Mhm.
are run by psychiatric institutions, or linked in with them, or linked in with groups that benefit from the pathologization of our psychological well-being. And
mm,
this is one of the advantages the autistic community has had, is that we were able to break away and form a cohesive online community that is quite interconnected in a sense. Um, so we have like a network of places to go to. So if one area doesn't work, there's a good chance now someone might start another area of the
mm,
community that will work for you. If you're privileged enough to be able to access the internet and
mm,
know where to look, you can find your neurokin
yes.
relatively easily now compared to, say, 10 years ago. But we've not had that same experience come through for mental well-being, for psychological well-being, for mental health or mental illness.
Mm,
Because the groups I've been in that specifically look at mental health tend to become very toxic.
yes. Mm,
You get a lot of backbiting and tone policing, and
yes.
you're not allowed to disagree with us. And it's very, very problematic. Um, and this is really, I think, the crux of what we need. Is we need the neurodivergent community to actually open up its arms and say, do you know what? You're bipolar, so you're one of us. Come and join the conversation. Be part of our exploration. Do you know what? Depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, we are all neurokin in a sense, in
Mm,
that we cannot perform to neurotypical standards. And whilst we may not have the same styles of communication, we may not have the same experiences, we do have one shared culture, which is we are not part of neuronormative society. We cannot
mm,
meet their standards.
mm. I think I don't know if a part of what might put people off um, is the idea that I don't know if co-opting is quite the word I'm looking for, but because I wrote a blog post about this because I'm getting annoyed with it. Neurodivergent and neurodiversity and the word neurodiverse being used incorrectly all the time is used by quite a lot of neuronormative people for support charities, various other things around neurodivergent experience. And um, I think people wrongly assume that neurodivergent is just ADHD and being autistic.
Mm.
And I think part of that is it reflects on those of us who have the privilege enough to be able to access, not only just access, but actually share our experiences like you and I are doing today. Um, might be different for us if we were also non-speaking or learning disabled or whatever whatever other ND you might be or might have. So I don't know if and I include myself in that, not showing up for other neurodivergent people enough, that it just makes the normies think that neurodivergence is just ADHD and autistic, and therefore it makes other ND people feel like they're not part of the group if they want to be, of course.
Yeah.
Um, so I because I see a lot of discussions on, oh well, that's not part of um, neurodiversity. That's not part of being neurodivergent, and some people just gatekeep people from that, which was completely and utterly against the idea of that word even existing, anyways. Um, is it Cassian Azamutu?
Cassian Sasamasu, I think the name.
Okay, sorry. But when they coined the term, the whole idea is if which is very much the idea of being neuroqueer as well. Like, if you're neurodivergent, you're neurodivergent. If you're neuroqueer, you're neuroqueer. Like, we don't have to have a tick box exercise because tick box exercises are for everybody who's outside. Who um who like to have, you have to be weighted a certain way for you to be autistic or not autistic or borderline this or not otherwise specified, or I'm just going to slap mood disorder on there because I can't be asked to look any further into that. Yeah, I see a lot of people say, well, they're not part of it, or this group isn't part of it, and oh, if you've had a stroke, would you be considered neurodivergent? Yes. If you have epilepsy, yes.
And
If you're Down syndrome, yes.
yeah, and I believe the person who coined the term neurodivergent specifically said, and I'll say it as close to the quote as I can remember, it's something along the lines of, "It's not another damn tool of gatekeeping."
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
and I think actually, if we could recognize just how broad that umbrella of neurodiversity is, like how broad the umbrella of being neurodivergent is,
Mm,
um, not only would we realize that there's more than autistic community and culture, we would recognize that neurodivergent experiences, they don't all fit into these neat little boxes. And all the people that we think,
mm,
oh, well, they're a different sort of neurodivergent to me, actually, all of our experiences start to bleed over the edges into one
mm,
another. And we can recognize shared experiences
mm.
just by being neurodivergent. But
Yeah.
what worries me then is if we move into a world where people go, well, you're neurodivergent or neurotypical,
Mm.
you've created another binary. And in my experience, where binaries exist, you start to get hatred.
The hatred already exists.
Yeah,
The
but
hatred already exists.
I worry, I guess, that if we enter a world where people just broadly identify as neurodivergent rather than all of these trying to box themselves into little categories that can be
Mm,
neatly medicated, would it, assuming that neurotypicals are still the predominant neurotype, or what we currently consider neurotypical is still the predominant neurotype,
mm.
um, have we just made it easier for them to discriminate against anyone who doesn't meet that performance standard of neurotypical?
I think it's easy anyways, David. I think it's. I get what you're saying, but I think it's easy anyways. Um, it's like in queer communities, like um, where people have different conversations about words that are slurs, were slurs, words that have been re reclaimed and stuff like that. Even the word queer itself is contentious, although it's used quite a lot in my experience, anyways. Um, so I feel like neurodivergence and the neurodiversity movement, the neurodivergent movement, is regaining power and creating community and creating safe spaces for people like yourself who can't go out and have your emotional kind of mental, sorry, I don't know what you'd call them, episodes, or um I would call mine episodes anyway, so let's talk about me. That might be easier. It's a safe space for me to go, got out of this really weird thought today, or it's the 20th time today I've thought about throwing a cup of tea in someone's face, because that's
It,
another one. I get an awful lot of that thought of, oh, what would happen if I just threw my cup of tea in someone's face? But even to be able to say that to someone who isn't my husband, and then to say, not just you, but whoever's watching or listening to this, um, is really freeing. All right, I'm going to call.
you see, one of the things that would be really freeing for me would be to have a community where I can check in and go like, do you know what? Like, I've heard 6 different voices today, and 3 of them have told me that I've got wings. Does anyone want to check in with me here and just tell me that I don't have wings that I've not known
Ooh,
about for my whole life? You
I
know,
like this. Yeah.
like if it would be nice for things to be, I don't like the word normal, but acceptable enough that I could just
Mm,
check in and go, do you know what? I think I'm having a delusional thought. I need someone to stop me from spiraling on this. But
absolutely.
because there is no decent community out there where people aren't immediately going to be like, you need to go to your psychiatrist to get more
Oh,
medication.
for real. Yeah.
Because there's no real community connectedness out there where people just go, "Do you know what, mate? Like, I get that experience as well. And, you know, here's what I do to check
Mm,
in with myself." Without that, it means that I constantly feel alone when I have those experiences. And but I mean, it's a weird one for me because I don't feel alone because I've got the autistic community and the broader neurodivergent community. I've
mm,
got all those people from our academy. You know, there's so many supportive people around me. I'm very privileged in that sense. But then I have this sort of dichotomy of being both very supported and feeling very alone at the same time
mm-hmm.
because no one, and this is, I guess, why I tend to talk about this a lot in my writing. No one really talks about psychotic experiences and goes
Mm,
like, "Hey, this is just a normal part of human experience. Like this happens."
mm,
It's treated like some big secret that no one talks about.
mm,
It would be lovely to be able to find my neurokin there as well, and not to have these two separate communities that might have different opinions on each other. What would be nice would be if we had that broader community of just people who have a different experience of the world, who can check in with each other, share that experience, share their culture, share their identity in a positive way.
mm. Or
It
at
would
least in a
help.
helpful way. I don't think it
Yeah,
has to be positive, but yeah, I understand what
when I
understand what you're
say
saying.
positive, when I say share their identity in a positive way, I don't necessarily mean be like everything's sunshine and rainbows.
Yay!
Like when I talk about a positive sense of identity, I'm talking about having a healthy relationship
Yeah,
with the fact that there is good and bad in your life.
yeah,
You know,
absolutely. Yeah,
not everything is going to be sunshine and rainbows, but not everything is going to be like a dumpster fire. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
like, and this is the
yeah,
problem that I think we have with mental health, psychological well-being, is that we're basically taught that, like, look at the number of jokes about people's mental health where it's like, yeah, my life's a
literally.
dumpster fire. Like, you know, like people joke about it because it's so normalized to assume that your mental health makes your life shit. But do you
Yeah,
know what? Actually, the fact that my brain can switch off its own reality and invent its own one has given me some strengths. For example, one of my special interests is, how do we know what's true? How do we know what
yeah,
truth is? You know, it's given me a very philosophical approach to everything.
yeah,
And I wouldn't have that if I hadn't had the experiences of my mind inventing its own realities.
mm,
And yeah, those episodes where I became delusional were terrifying, but I was able to draw positives out of those experiences.
mm.
You know, so I feel like, you know, in the autistic community, people are like, autism isn't good or bad, it simply is.
Yeah, sure.
I would like it if we could get to that place with mental health and perhaps
Mm,
stop calling it mental health as if it is an illness. You know, maybe more broadly talk about our well-being, aspects of our
mm,
well-being under the broader neurodiversity umbrella. But what would be nice would be if we could say not everything to do with our well-being is going to be good or bad. It just is what it
is.
is, and we can share in those experiences. We can share in the fact that we are human beings and we do not all have the same experience of the world. We do not all have the same experience of ourselves.
Mm. You know what kind of puts me off of not off that, because that's a brilliant idea and I'm with you, David. But what kind of worries me in the autistic online circles that I run in anyways, or people that I follow, especially big pages, I find there are a lot of words there that I just think, oh, that could have been so easily changed into a different word. So I'm not going to necessarily call it saneism, but there's a lot of kind of disregard, disrespect, bit of ignorance towards people with mental health concerns. My least favourite of all of those, apart from hysterical, because obviously that's got very misogynistic uh, roots to it, is obsessed.
Yeah,
Oh, people use
that
that word all the time. I'm
that word
obsessed
makes me
with that
deeply
outfit.
uncomfortable.
Oh,
But
I'm obsessed with this. Oh, I'm so obsessed with that. And as someone who's lived with obsession for 25 plus years or whatever, I can tell you, you are not obsessed with that outfit.
almost feels like a form of cultural appropriation, except they don't understand that what they're appropriating is really not a pleasant experience.
It's not a good look. It's really not. And that's what makes me think, not that I'm unsafe in autistic spaces, but I just feel like I already have to, this is very personal to me. I already have to show my pronouns to people and perhaps have a little bit of an explanation about that, perhaps not, whatever. Um, so I have to kind of unravel that quite a lot with people. Um, and then I already have to unravel the, no, you're autistic, and all the bullshit that comes with that. Then I have to unravel the ADHD side of things. Um, and then just loads of other personal stuff that I have. But then I feel like, and I don't know why it is my obsessive compulsive, but I feel like it's just another layer that I'm not quite ready for yet. Like, um, yeah, I just find it really difficult, and I think because conversations between identity first language and person first language, and that isn't really used in mental health kind of capacities either. Um, and yeah, I feel like it can be really difficult online with people um giving their information and clapping back and various other things. Clapping back might not have been the best term there, actually. Sorry about that. But people having conversations about how they see things. Um, and they're kind of almost being a inner circle in autistic spaces, or at least the perception of inner circle, and things have to be said this way and they have to be done that way, and gatekeeping and rules and stuff. And we're already fed up for normal people rules. The normies already rule everything else. Like, can we not do this to each other as well? That'd be perfect. I don't want to go into it too much, because it will be massively obvious who I'm talking about, but like, this has happened recently, um, for a black run autistic page, um, and a white run autistic page, and it kind of all just got a bit heated, and it wasn't clear why it was racially charged, even though it blatantly was racially charged. So I think that's why the person first, identity first, is also a binary, which doesn't actually do a lot of us justice, or give all of us autonomy to talk about how we want to talk about things.
Yeah. And
Um,
I talked about this the other day myself. Like, we keep complaining that we keep isolating marginalized groups
mm,
from our community and then complaining when they don't use the same language that we do. Like, they're not using the same language that we do because we're not giving them access to our environment. Like,
yeah.
we talk about making the environment accessible, but the racism, the
Oh,
transphobia, like all of
oh,
these things create inaccessibility in our
mm,
community.
mm,
And
mm,
as I said earlier, the path to neuroqueerness is paved with privilege and safety. Like,
mm,
you cannot express yourself authentically. You cannot be who you are and feel safe in your community if you don't have that safety. Like, you can't be yourself if you are not safe to be yourself. So
mm,
when we create communities that become weird and gatekeepy and have lots of rules,
mm,
we have then made it impossible for people to queer themselves, to be
mm,
neuroqueer,
mm,
to be authentic. We say, oh, we need to take the mask off. You can't just pull a mask off, okay? It is a part of your identity
mm.
because
Yeah.
it is part of you. But you can't start unpicking, okay, what am I doing for the benefit of others and what do I need to do for my own well-being? You can't pull that apart until you pull apart the oppressive structures that exist not just in neurotypical society. There are oppressive structures existing within the neurodivergent community. And
Hmm.
that probably plays one of the biggest roles in why mental health is still kept on the sidelines, because those oppressive structures don't want to be affiliated with mental health concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I should stand up and start clapping, David. Yeah, I really agree with what you've just said a lot. Yeah, there is so much oppression. Again, it's all white centered. It's all cis het centered. You know, it's non-learning disabled, it's non-physically disabled, like it centers around, it has got a weird hierarchy to it, which I just wish it didn't at all. And mental health is definitely part of that, and mental health in with the intersections of being trans or being black or being any range of kind of person or identity, um is really difficult, because the more marginalizations you bring with you on your journey, um, the easier it is, and it really shouldn't be, but the easier it is to find hate within groups, even groups that say they're inclusive and stuff like that. So it's not the same thing, but I'm still surprised by how many um, neurodivergent pages still don't do alt text or image descriptions, or still share flashing gifs and emojis and stuff like that. And it's just stuff like that that I just think this is really just, there's a lot of privilege when I say this, and I appreciate that. But this is like real, like quite low level stuff, I would say. And if you're having a low spoon day, ask people to help you with image descriptions. If I'm about and I see someone online saying I need help with an image description, absolutely, I'll help you with that. And I've seen
Absolutely.
countless other people do that. So can ask for help for it. There's a reason this is a community as opposed to like singular people just floating about doing their own thing. But I shared about that the other day, about people taking, I actually mentioned to you about this anyways, David, about people taking images that I've used on my page, weren't created by me, so it's not a problem. And obviously, once I've put stuff out there, it belongs to the internet anyway. So, like, yeah, whatever. Um, but if you're gonna steal shit from my page, can you also steal the image description? please, like, steal shit. Yeah, okay, whatever. But like, steal the image description as well, mate, because that's like my time and emotional labor, and it will make it more accessible to other people. And then I wrote a post about this, as you do. And then someone said, "Oh, I might share something from the page, but I don't think I've got any visually impaired or blind friends." And I was like, "Do you know?" I just think, "Oh, I just feel
I
like,
guess at the end of the day, I'm not some kind of dragon sitting on a pile of memes going, these are my
ah,
memes. What I want, you know, if they get out there, like, cool, because
lovely,
most of them are probably saying something important. But if
mm,
you're gonna steal shit, at least make it accessible.
please." And it's
Like,
already there, mate. You've already
like,
stolen half of
you,
it.
all
Just
you've
steal
got
the
to
other
do
half
is
of it.
copy and paste. You don't even have to type it out yourself. Like,
I love it. Yes, please do it.
yeah,
Do it. Or just share from the page, anyways, because that's a little bit
yeah.
easier. But yeah, yeah, it's just stuff like that that I just think this is very strange. You're actually going out of your way to make it less accessible to more people, and that for me is, and then going, oh yeah, welcome one and all, and it's just, yeah, not sure about that. It's a
Cool,
bit
as long as
peculiar.
you fit into our very tight box of who we are making
Yeah,
this
and I
accessible
don't think
for.
any of you are visually impaired or blind. And whilst we're talking about visually impaired and blind, there's work coming up that I'm doing with a visually impaired blind group, and it's art based. So I've put on my page, oh, doing this, and I want to make it as accessible as possible and everything else like that. And someone put the comment underneath, and they were right to an extent, but they said about the fact that you should really ask visually impaired and blind people. Absolutely, I should. Why do you think that visually impaired and blind people aren't reading this? Aren't reading this? Is like a very, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going, hello, sighted people.
Yeah,
How do you think I would work with this group of people? It's like, I'm doing this. What are your ideas? And all sorts of people are hopefully gonna message me or whatever, comment. I just found it a bit peculiar that they would think that visually impaired people and blind people aren't on the internet, or they
Yeah,
don't follow me, or I don't allow them to follow me, or they
yeah. It's like
exist in a
that.
vacuum somewhere. I don't know.
It's like that meme I saw where someone had commented on something like, "I don't think that disabled spaces should count, say, except outside the hours of 9 to 5." And someone responded to it, and they were like, "You understand we're people, not werewolves, right? Look,
Yeah.
like, like we do normal shit. Like we don't. Okay, I don't do normal shit, but that's a choice I made.
Yeah, but you want to have access to that normal shit,
Like,
just in case you want to go on a little adventure to
yeah,
normal town.
sometimes I venture out, I do something outside the box, like pretend to be a normal person. But widely speaking, most, disabled folks want access to normal things like, memes.
Yeah, like
But
why wouldn't we? Yeah.
exactly. But anyway, I'm aware we've been talking for about an hour now, so we should
Okay.
probably think about wrapping up. Do you have any final thoughts on, community and mental health and neurodiversity?
I don't know. I think I don't have final thoughts on anything, David, because final thought turns into final half an hour of
Yeah,
talking.
I
Uh,
realise the irony in what I said there, but
uh, um, I just think it's important. I think even this conversation today has been important for me, even if it hasn't for other people, but hopefully it has been. Um, and I've shared things today that I haven't said to anyone outside my husband, so that's a big deal for me personally. Um, I just feel like keep having conversations about these things, but I feel like I want to do something and to create a space or something like that. So that's maybe something we could talk about at some other point, David. But that's my plan. I'd like to have a little um mental health space that was
mm,
um you know as accessible as mental health spaces can be, I suppose.
yeah.
So that would be quite nice. But yeah, I don't really do final thoughts very well, but there it is.
Well, I think if we've learned anything from this conversation today, it's that a little community connectedness can go a long way when it comes to the well-being of all neurodivergent people. It
Mm,
doesn't just
mm,
apply to the autistic community. It doesn't just apply to ADHD. It doesn't even just apply to ADHD. Every person with a different brain can benefit from a connected community, a
mm,
connected and supportive community. It may not be the whole answer, but I think it's a significant piece of
mm,
a wider picture. And I think it's a nice thought that maybe one day we might be able to work towards a world where there is a decent community for all of us who
mm.
aren't neurotypical. But thank you so much for coming and talking to us today, Katie. It's been a really good conversation. I think this has been brilliant for like the first proper episode. I think, I couldn't have asked for a better conversation, really. So, um, to everyone who's listened, thank you very much. I have been your host, David Gray-Hammond, and I will see you in the next episode. So take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.